Morning, everybody. All right, main feeds are firing up here. So, hey, good morning, everybody. Beautiful Sunday morning here on the Slavik farm. I am Nick Slavik. I am the proprietor of the Nick Slavik Painting and Restoration Company, also the host of this show, Ask Painter Live. It is a weekly live Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube show where we talk about the life of a master craftsperson and a paint business entrepreneur. And I am sitting here in the glory of a Minnesota summer morning Sunday with my family mincing around in the background. I think daughter went off to the gym. Son is eating his breakfast, about to go to the gym. My wife and younger kids are taking care of some neighbor dogs today. They're in and out of the house. And William, good morning. Good morning. And I'm sitting on the patio. We had a glorious family bonfire last night. The remainder of the logs still smoldering around in the background here. William from Brazil, bom dia, my friend. This is beautiful. I remember many mornings waking up in Brazil to similar mornings like this, where it's kind of warm, kind of humid. The birds are singing, and it reminds me of that. So good morning to you, my friend. I want to talk about fragility today. It's a topic that's been coming up, not specifically in a lot of conversations with my paint business friends. It can seem like kind of a morose subject, something a little bit sensitive, but actually it spurs on a lot of really good conversations. I'll give you a little bit of background on that, how it comes up, and what the discussions have been, because it's really interesting. I am curious about what the industry is curious about. And my own business is a pretty good canary in the coal mine for that. But also my friends' businesses, especially the ones that are a couple, maybe even many stages in growth, maturity beyond me. I really pay attention to those people, the people who are upfront, open, and honest, and speak freely of their personal lives and their professional lives. I'm really curious about what they're curious about. And recently, we've been talking about fragility, and not specifically, but it's come up in a lot of conversations. It feels like we go down a road through these conversations, and eventually it comes back to, it's one of those things where when you ask three successive questions, you eventually get down to some theoretical, moralistic conversation. And I feel like when you talk about paint business entrepreneurship, or just entrepreneurship in general, eventually you always, but what about this then? Then what about this then? Then what's the end result of that? Then eventually you get to fragility, which is interesting. And it doesn't sound as negative. It's not as negative as it sounds. But just thinking about everything that we do, why we do it. So I run a paint business with a leadership team. There's 2 estimators, 2 project managers, an office coordinator, and now I have a marketing apprentice. And you would think, hey, great, there's redundancy. Like, we got a whole bunch of W-2 painters. We got a whole bunch of good subcontractors. There's just a bunch of stuff going on. And even if one estimator has a family issue where they need to take a half a year off or something, we have another one. And then I'm always the redundancy there. You could say the same thing about like an office admin. We only have one of those, but I created the systems. I could always hop in. But eventually you start thinking about, like, you play these scenarios out in your head like you're supposed to as a business owner, which is like, how much redundancy do you need? And how many options do you need? And how many fill-ins do you need? And it gets really interesting because I've been a long, multi-year, ongoing conversation with a company that's 4 or 5 times my size. And what's really interesting is, this is a thought that I always have in my head. Like, I am the operations manager of my company. I'm the marketing manager of my company. If I was not to be here, I do have a contingency plan, right? There is a letter. You always think about it like a letter, a handwritten letter in an envelope, like break if there's an emergency, and take this letter out, and it has instructions for this thing. But really, it's more of like it's a series of handshake agreements and emails and understandings that I renew with people yearly. Sorry, wandering a little bit, but this is an interesting subject, and I find myself thinking about it all the damn time. A company 4 to 5 times larger than me, we have these very deep discussions about personal life, professional life, how it intertwines. And lately, the topic of fragility has been coming up. And what's really interesting is that at 5 times larger, 4 or 5 times larger than me, fragility comes up with them. And it kind of like, of course it does, right? I mean, they probably have an office staff of somewhere between 15 and 20 people. They could have somewhere into the, 60 to 90 humans in the field, technicians working for them. And yet, one thing that they seem to be focused on, intentionally or unintentionally, is fragility. And how, you often think like, well, could this thing blow away in the wind if a couple things happen? And it's interesting to hear them talk about it, because it's like, oh, wait a second. There's this common thought of like, okay, as we grow this paint business, we start off as a single owner operator typically. And this is I encompass a lot of very stereotypical stories in the industry of, like coming into with my father and things like that. Side note, I yesterday we cleaned out the garage and I found lots of pictures that I haven't seen in a lot of years of me when I started painting with my dad. And I have a picture of me when I was 8 years old painting with my dad and his work truck and things like that. Side note, maybe not a side note, fragility, talking about my father's business as well too. But this paint business that's many times larger than me and more professional and more mature, they talk about fragility. And it really got me thinking about like, okay, if they think about fragility a lot, like where does the fragility end? Where does all that sort of thing stop, right? So we commonly start off as single owner operators, and then we're like, well, listen, if I just get some people in the field, now this thing is stable. If I hurt my knee, then there's somebody else there to paint, and that's fine. But then you need a manager, and somebody needs to do the estimates, the project management, the office admin, and marketing and things like that, and that's all fine. Okay, so you start doing some of that, and you're like, well, okay, now, if I want to take a vacation, all the estimates and project management start, but I can probably set my painters up. Okay, fine. So let's get an estimator and a project manager. And then you're like, oh my God, when my project manager goes on vacation, now it's just me again. I got to do that. Okay, let's get 2 of them. And then you have 2 project managers, and then you have 2 estimators. Then you have an office admin. And then eventually you take the next step and you maybe have 2 people admin. And then you have eventually, which would probably be the next phase when you reach into that $4 to $6 million range, is like an operations manager, or a general manager, or just a manager of the managers, somebody to actually own the profit and loss and do that. And then you're like, oh my God, now we have a leader of the company. Now we have somebody to do that. But what if they go on vacation? What if they decide to leave? And then you have to, it's like, okay, well then take the next step. Then you start getting big enough where you go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 million. And then you have a vice president of sales. Then you have a vice president of operations. Then you have all this other stuff. And then there's managers underneath them. And it's like this. I can't find the correct words right now, but it's like it doesn't stop, right? And so there's two kind of thoughts that I have on this, which is, oh man, when you think about the fragility of the things that we're building and then all the families that depend on it. I mean, even in my company, we don't have that large of a company, but there's 40 families that depend on us for something. And I would argue potentially maybe the majority of their sustenance and income on this thing. And you think about fragility in that way of these families depending on you for that sort of thing. And it's a big thing. You carry this down the line. Okay, we need to be larger, more sustainable, more predictable, more consistent. Okay, so then you start getting into that 8, 9, $10 million business, and there's tons and tons of people. But then you still think about the key roles in the business, and you think, well, what if that person leaves? Then what if that person leaves? Or what if their life, you always think about these things in life that we can control versus not control. And when we talk about fragility, you kind of have to parse it into 2 separate conversations about fragility that we can control and do something about, and fragility that we cannot control. And with cannot control, personal health, children, family stuff, world events, things like that. And other stuff we can control, like the size of our business and the people we bring in and things like that. And I circle this whole conversation back around to, I think this is a really good litmus test for entrepreneurs, which is, If we were to sit down and have a conversation about the fragility of everything that we do, how our personal lives and professional lives intertwine, which camp do you fall into? Existential dread or peace? And what's really interesting when I think about the fragility question is I got, I'm trying to pick the right words again here too. Um, I feel great about how I fell on this side of the thing, because when I hear a business 4 or 5 times larger than me talk about their worry about fragility and stability and things like that, I almost got this sign of peace and calmness, because it's like, oh, this is a thing that just doesn't go away. And of course it doesn't, right? Of course it doesn't. You carry this out to $100 million company with a CEO. What if that person leaves? A very integral person that we've seen this in large S&P 500 companies, where they have one maverick, one just amazing human being that makes a whole bunch of choices, and the fate of the company and the stock price and the future is all dependent on this thing. And then they change them out, and the performance isn't quite there. And you think, oh, okay, this is a thing that doesn't end. And I actually feel a little bit of calmness about it, because another great realization of this is what entrepreneurs do. You need to be a little more risk averse than everybody else to do this sort of thing. You need to be able to walk out into a little bit of blue ocean and rely on your fundamentals and get stuff done, right? You need to be okay with uncertainty. You need to be okay with instability. And even as you grow, all you can do is manage the things you can manage. And there's always going to be things that show up and create instability and fragility. And I think the people who have the largest, most consistent, most stable, infragile businesses do a lot of very simple, unsexy, mundane management every day to take care of their people. The people then being the catalyst for stability and infragility, if I can use that word. So I think it's a really good test. And I would hope that when you guys watch this show or think about this, it's something I can guarantee you this. This is not the first time you've ever thought about this. This is not the first time the thought or the dread of fragility has popped into your head about the things that we do, right? But I think it's a good litmus test for all of us entrepreneurs, which is when you think about this, when you watch this show, when these thoughts go through your head, which camp do you fall into? Is it the existential dread, or is it the peace and calmness and realization that everybody deals with this? And I found myself thinking a lot of the times, it's very difficult for me to put my head in myself in the head of an employee or a professional salary person, right? One thing that I do to check myself all the time, I didn't grow up with a lot of perspective about a lot of things, and I suffered from not having perspective for a lot of years. So I spend a lot of my time right now trying to objectively place myself in the lives of other people to check if I'm doing what's okay or what's right, or if I'm on the right side of legal and morality stuff and things like that. And it's just a good way to check myself. And I often think about, like, okay, 43 years old, I got military experience, I got a college education, I got a bunch of experience running a business, managing humans, owning a P&L, things like that. Like, if I was a corporate professional right now and I had a job, one knee-jerk reaction is, oh man, at least there's managers over me. I don't have to own everything, right? But at the same time, you don't decide as much as your fate as you might like to, right? So you get a corporate job, and depending on your personality, that's either a relief or it's a burden. I think to me, the last time I had one of these was the Army, which is not a real job, but I constantly felt angst about wanting to do things my own way, about being limited by the pay scale and the qualifications to move up and down, that sort of thing. And I think this is in fragility isn't a thing that just us business owners deal with or master craftspeople deal with. I think I think in corporate America, I have to imagine there's a sense of fragility there too, because you may be stable, 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 and then all of a sudden the axe comes down and you're not. So I have to believe that there's a feeling of that in there as well too. And I know there's people watching. I see the names here right now on Instagram and Facebook. I know there's people in the professional world there who probably deal with this too. I would love to hear from you guys to hear what it's like in corporate America out there. People with real jobs, the sense of fragility too. So Onyx Painting from Instagram. It's like being the dad of a family. You make the decision. There's no looking back. Keep carrying on. Yep. I agree. There's a lot of good thoughts here, but it's something that I've been thinking about. And in the end, I feel this deep sense of calmness about all this stuff, which is this is the world in which people like you and I operate in. Uncertainty, right? I've been through a housing crisis, 2007, 8, 9. I've been through a global pandemic. I've been through good hires and bad hires. I've been through good decisions and bad decisions of my own and of others. We've been through horrible experiences with clients. We've been through great experiences with clients. We've won national awards. I've had to give money back on jobs. There's been a lot of ins and outs. And because I'm the owner of it all, I get to feel the full breadth and width of that. And in the end, when I hear people much farther advanced from me talk about fragility, I just feel the sense of calm. It's like, yeah, that's what we operate in. And that's what we do. And our baseline is a certain amount of instability, craziness, fragility, and things like that. And if you wish it away, there would not be the reward there, right? If all this was a little more of a sure thing, a little more stable, a little less fragile, there would not be the reward, the satisfaction, the net profit, all the beautiful things that we do here. So this is a common thing that I get often, because I don't just deal with how to brush or roll or spray paint or job cost or market or lead jobs. I do kind of readily share about this side of the business. I think you guys would be surprised about the amount of messages that I get from my fellow master craftspeople and painters from across the world about the human side of this sort of thing. And honestly, they are my favorite. All those questions about paint and stuff, listen, I'm a nerd. I can geek out about that stuff. I love answering those questions. But my favorite ones are the ones where people are feeling fragile and they will message me. And I know that takes a lot. It would take me a lot to message somebody that I only know from the internet and sort of share deeply of myself like that. But man, we enter into some great conversations. And I think in the end, if there's something that you could take away from this show, is that we all feel it and it manifests. We all feel the infragility, right? There's a way that it manifests between complaining about employees, complaining about clients, complaining about the market, complaining about leads, complaining about a specific type of paint or process or things like that. But in the end, you see all these spicy messages on the internet where somebody posts a painting video and then the rest of our industry just tears them down. It would not surprise me that if at the base of all that is this deep, wide chasm of a sense of fragility with all that stuff, right? And I think it's a lot of us and me too coming to terms with how much fragility we have to deal with every day, what we have to do to overcome it, make it less fragile, especially when our own families and the families of so many other people are relying on it, right? And this is not a plea for empathy. This is not a plea for kudos or anything like that. It's like we chose to do this, right? But I think we all need to come to terms with that. It doesn't go away. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how many people. It's always going to be there. It's what we signed up for. And if we operate with the smallest percentage of instability, inconsistency, and infragility, there's a big reward for it all. And that's a great feeling. That is a great feeling. We're getting some comments here. Phil Klein, my buddy from Iowa. It's the best and worst part of it. You know it, man. I know you're a super introspective guy. This is probably not the first time you've thought about that either. Oscar Milan. What works for me is going back in time and realizing how much I've accomplished by myself and with the help of so many, including, oh, thanks, man. That's really nice of you. Phil Klein, the gap and the gain. Genesis. Genesis, my friend from New York from Instagram. So true. It's a roller coaster. Sometimes you get tired. Yeah, that's the whole thing, man. And what's interesting now is that I think now that we've entered back into a regular world after COVID, the post-COVID time where we just go back to normal, I'm getting a lot more of these messages, man. And my conversations with my fellow master craftspeople and paint business entrepreneurs are sort of going down this line too. And I realize that almost every professional conversation I've had with my closest people in the industry, at the base of it, I think there's been this sort of feeling of fragility, and it hasn't really come out directly as that. But I, I'll recap this entire conversation. The conversations I've had with this other business that's 4 or 5 times larger than me, I'm so glad that that conversation eventually got 7 layers deeper into, boy, I feel fragility. I feel like this could all blow away at some point, or here's the threat vectors of that thing. And I'm so glad it went there, because it did kind of recap a lot of feelings. It kind of just shot you right in here. It's like, oh, wait a second. A lot of the things that I talk about at the base of it is that fragility, and having some thoughts about that. And when I do my ideation runs in the morning, I try to pick a topic, and I've picked fragility a few times. But honestly, most of the conversations, now that the conversation of fragility has entered into my head, it kind of goes there quite a bit. So Chris Rivera, Nick, you created the space for us and feel comfortable to reach out and build this community. We're not alone. Also, as long as we just keep touching base with the other and carrying on with the journey. Yeah, I agree, man. There's a slug line. You bring up a really good point. Go to the Facebook page of Ask a Painter. The entire header is, you're not alone. And that's sort of the slug line of this entire thing. It can encapsulate oil primer, job costing, humans, family life. But it is true that, sometimes when you feel fragile, you feel alone, and you're not, right? And at the end of this whole thing, I feel you fall into a couple camps, remember? You can either feel existential dread, or you can feel comfort and peace and calmness with all this. But I think there's more branches on that decision tree underneath those. And I don't think you're wrong if you fall into the camp of existential dread, because I felt that many, many times before. And I think just through repetitions in this industry, I've made peace with a lot of it. But the branches of decisions on the tree underneath that are, does it move you to action or inaction? And I think that's where entrepreneurs get made, which is, so you feel fragile, so the world is fragile. People 4 or 5 times larger than you feel fragile. Does that move you to inaction and despair, or does that move you to get energized and take some action? And for me, it moved me to action. It always has. And I think one of the things in looking back that I'm very grateful for, which is a biological urge for me, which is, even in the times where I felt existential dread, those are the times where I moved to even more action. So I'm hoping the same for you guys. And I think that is the true test of an entrepreneur. Not a good entrepreneur, not a bad entrepreneur, but the true test of somebody that's just going to keep going for the good of their people. And grateful to share this with you guys. The last of the logs on my family bonfire are still crackling in the wind here. As a matter of fact, my buddy Chris Moll, we've had some great times up in the northern wilderness of Minnesota, thinking about him recently. And I specifically ordered a batch of split pine logs, so that when me and my family sit out here at that bonfire, we can smell that pine wood fire. It's a distinct smell. It reminds me of Chris Moll's house and up north. And just a good reminder of the fragility of all this stuff. Grateful for all the humans around us, that we're not alone. And I hope you guys get moved to action, just like I did, just a whole bunch of other people did here. So thank you guys. Have a great Sunday, and contemplate the fragility, but move to action. See you guys next week.